What's going on, guys? Dan Watson, Learning Cameras, and I've got the Fuji X-T20. It was only a couple months ago that I finished my review on the X-T2, and it was actually my favorite camera of 2016. Loved it a lot, produced excellent quality stills, video, basically anything that you threw at it. And so that was a camera I really enjoyed. And so when Fuji announced the X-T20 at about half the price, it was definitely a camera I had to check out. And what better test subject than some $250,000 cars and some really rare exotics. So stay tuned for those pictures. And also, if you check the description below, you're going to be able to download those photos as well as links to purchase this camera, as well as my recommended lenses and some SD cards as well. So definitely check that out. Now, as far as lenses, I actually use the 50mm f2, which is a brand new lens that came out with this camera, as well as the kit 16 to 50mm. I would highly recommend springing $200 more for the 18 to 55mm f2.8 to f4. It is worth it. It is a great quality lens. It's the lens I use the most on the Fuji X-T2, and it is just a much better lens that you would get with anything else, and especially compared to some of the other manufacturers, it's a great option at about $200 more than this with the kit lens. And so yeah, I would definitely highly recommend that. So check that out, a lot coming in. And kind of on the Fuji X-T2, I did want to mention that I do have a video that kind of shows the differences between that. So check out that video as well, and then we'll go over some of those in this review. So stay tuned, and we got a lot more coming. Now let's talk about the build quality. I'm still a huge fan of Fuji cameras because they're so compact, but they're built really well. The dials have such a resounding click to them. It's a really traditional style, unlike your DSLRs like the Canon T7i that just came out and the Nikon D5600, but it's overall an amazing design. One thing I like too is it's very customizable, kind of like the Sony a6300, and virtually all of your dials and menus and stuff like that can be customized the way that you want them. One other thing too is you do have the ability to touch this button, the back dial, and access secondary functions. So I programmed that to access my ISO. So now I have quick access to my shutter speed, my aperture, and my ISO. Now, one thing on the aperture dial, these lenses, some lenses have an aperture dial on them. Whenever they do, these dials are not going to run the aperture. It's only going to be on these lens dials. However, if you're using some lenses, like the base kit lens that comes with this, it does not have an aperture dial, and so there, your dials are going to be needed in order to access the aperture. I wish that Fuji kept things consistent so that even if I had an aperture ring on this lens, I could put it over to A and then access my manual aperture controls on the dials. That would be best. That way, if I'm switching between lenses, I can do either one of them. So sometimes I like using this, but if I'm switching a lot between lenses that do have this and don't have this, it's kind of annoying to have to change how I operate and hold my camera between those two. But you know, overall, I'm still a huge fan of the way that this is set up. Very quick access to all of your settings, your shooting modes right here, shutter dial, exposure comp, and so basically everything that you need on here. If you're looking for a very traditional setup, you're going to want to look at some of the other options like the Canon T7i and the Nikon D5600, but this is unique. It's built well and offers everything that you need. Now, this isn't my favorite camera for quick shooting, and that's because if you're going to be changing these dials a lot, you kind of have to take your eye away from the viewfinder. It's a little hard to reach them from here. And also there's a function button right here that I almost never use because it's almost impossible to find that button right there. But it is there if you do want it. But you just kind of have to take your eye away from the viewfinder too much. However, when you're operating a body like this, I just find it more fun because you're constantly checking your settings. You're not just shooting and then adjusting. You're looking at what you're shooting, looking at your settings, and making sure that this is really what you want to be doing before you do it. And if you're a fan of photography or cameras themselves, that's just all good. Now, another thing is that the image quality is amazing. And here we're going to take a look at some $250,000 cars and some other stuff that I was able to shoot. And this is second to none. So check out these. Again, check out the description below to download the full-size RAW and JPEG files from this. And feel free to leave me a comment below. And we're going to take a look at these images and let me know your thoughts. first thing I noticed is going to be detail, detail, detail. And if you're shooting with this lens, there is a lot of it. And the 50mm f2 is a great lens, and a little bit more on that later. But overall, I mean, if you like pixel peeping, I just did it all day long because it's just drool worthy on the files. There is so much detail even at 100%, and that is subject to this sensor, amazing sensor and quality, as well as the lenses that Fuji is offering. And if you're looking at other things like dynamic range, I was able to pull a ton of detail out of the shadow areas, and the images still look great. No big issues, no grain patterns in the shadows or banding or anything like that. And also just the overall tones and quality of the colors look amazing. It's pretty typical Fuji, which I like a lot because it makes it look unique and different in camera, and so you really don't need to do as much processing as some other cameras. So overall, the image quality is second to none. ISO, you're looking at about 3200 ISO. I found that's very, very good, and 6400 is going to be still usable. And for me, that puts it among the best APS-C cameras right now in existence. Now for video shooters, the X-T20 is good, but not quite to the level of the X-T2. You are limiting some features from that big brother camera, and honestly, if you're looking at video recording, the A6300 might be a little bit better, but let's take a look at those details. The biggest one is while you still can shoot 4K, it is using a different type of technology, and so it's line skipping rather than a full pixel readout of that sensor. And that means it's just not quite as much detail that we're getting from these images. And so they're still very good, but we're just not getting that crisp detail that we are getting from the X-T2 as well as Sony cameras that are using that full system on there. Now there's some other little missing features, most of which you won't miss that much. For example, we're dealing with a 2.5mm jack for the microphone. And so you're going to need an adapter for that if you're adapting to most microphones out there, the 3.5mm. Also, you don't have log recording, we don't have a headphone jack, and the screen is a little bit more limited on the access you can get. You can go up, but is not really much to go down, and definitely nothing sideways or front facing for that. So overall, there's just a couple of limitations there. Now for 4K shooting, you are limited as well to only 10 minutes of recording time, which is extremely low. And for 1080p, it bumps it up to 15 minutes. For 99% of cases, that's probably not a big deal. But for example, when I'm recording my kids' rehearsals and stuff like that, it can go for up to an hour. It's going to be really, really annoying to have to push start and stop every 10 minutes, and so, or more often if I need to wait until a song records. So there are some cases where that's going to be a big deal for you, but overall, I think it's good for most people. Now, video autofocus is pretty good. It actually holds on to objects pretty well, but when you're shooting in 4K, you do lose the ability to have tracking. So I can't just tap on a subject and have them track around the frame. I'm going to be limited to selecting an area, and that area will be autofocus, or the entire sensor area and let it choose. It's a little bit weak. Now, if you bump it down into 1080p, you do have that. So most likely it's a processor limitation of just handling that kind of process that's coming in, needing to do the autofocus tracking as well as record 4K video. But that's a limitation compared to a lot of other cameras like Canon DSLRs with dual pixel autofocus, or the Sony system that does allow all of that. Now, Canon doesn't offer 4K video in any of their cameras right now, so for that kind of stuff, you're going to be looking at upgrading to the big brother like the X-T2, or looking at the Sony A6300 for that. Or if you don't mind going to a little bit smaller sensor, the Panasonic G85 might be a good option for you. So if you're a lover of cameras, photography, or just the retro feel of this, I think you're going to be right at home with the X-T20. It's a great camera, has stellar performance, all the features that you would need. Now, if you're doing a little bit more video side, again, I would highly look at the A6300 or possibly even the Panasonic G85 as another option, just because they give you a little bit more features than you're able to get, especially with that A6300. Now, I do prefer this on the photo side. It just gives you a unique body style that I like a lot, and shooting with it is just a lot more fun. Now, if you're still looking at the traditional style like DSLRs, like the Nikon D5600 or Canon T7i, you will save some money on both of those options, but with a couple of caveats. And one of them is going to be, if you're looking at the Nikon D5600, it's a great DSLR when you're looking through the viewfinder, which this camera actually is a very, very good viewfinder. Although I will say, there's just a little bit of lag when you put your face up to it and then take it away. There's just a little bit of lag that I don't like, which you don't have it on DSLR. However, if you try to use a DSLR in live view, like the Nikon D50-600, there's a ton of issues because it's really not meant for that. And so autofocus is slow, the performance is sluggish, and you don't have control of your aperture while you're in live view or shooting video. And so for video and that kind of stuff in live view shooting, I highly don't recommend the Nikon D50-600. Now the Canon T7i is much better for these purposes and kind of gives you some of that good quality from mirrorless cameras in their live view mode, and you do get a great autofocus system. You're sticking with 1080p video because Canon still won't give us 4K options, but for most of the people out there, that's going to be absolutely fine, and you will get quick autofocus in your live view shooting, and so that might be a decent option for you. But if you're looking for just something fun and awesome to take out with, it really kind of brings you back to the old days, and it's a joy to shoot with this kind of camera. And I will say that the lens options for Fuji are also very nice. Canon does make some good lenses too that are f2.8, and plus you have some options from Sigma that are very good, while Sony lenses can get a little bit more expensive for any decent f4 lenses, and they don't have any f2.8s natively for APS-C sensors. So overall, this is going to be a great camera, but don't just trust me. Check out the images below, download those. You know, in a space of cell phones and plain old DSLRs from 10 years ago that are really filling up this budget marketplace, it's nice to see something different in the marketplace that's still competing on technology, as well as giving us just something fun and amazing to shoot with. So I really think that you'll like this a lot. But again, check out that in the description below, and a whole lot more coming, so stay tuned for that.